about Ralph Backstrom Calder, his winning season? Any memories about him?
Ralph Backstrom was the classic third-line center in hockey. You know, as a kid growing up in Boston, the Bruins didn't even have a first-line center, and they always got these Canadian guys like Cliff Pennington and Billy Carter from the Canadians, and they were supposed to be, you know, lead the Bruins to glory. Of course, they never did. Ralph Backstrom would have been the first-line center on most teams in the NHL, but he played behind Beliveau and behind Henri Richard. But of course, if either one of them had missed a game, Ralph moved up to the first line or the second line, and nothing ever went wrong. He was a classic, consummate hockey player, and a gentleman also.
Speaking of captains, Bob Gainey, you placed him low.
When you look at the history of the Canadians with their captains, Gainey, you know, was a checking forward, a defensive player, and you don't really think of defensive players as being the types of on-ice leaders that you need. He was a shutdown guy. You look at Serge Savard as the captain of the Canadians. He was an operator. You'd go to Montreal, you need theater tickets. If you were a player, you needed a deal in a car, you needed a tip on the fifth race at some track or something like that. Serge had all the answers. Bob was a very quiet, you know, sort of a reluctant, not a reluctant warrior, but he didn't want to say me. He never said much publicly. I don't know what he said in the locker room, but nobody ever said to me that he gave some, you know, knock him down, drag him out speech in the locker room to help him win a game. He wasn't Richard, and of course he was following not too far after the most legendary to me of all captains, which would be the stately, the great, the greatest, the classiest athlete I have ever met, Jean Beliveau.
And about Jean Beliveau?
To me, Jean Beliveau was the classic hockey player. He never used a curved stick because, as he used to say, it would take away the backhand that he used to score so many goals. What was he, 6'3", 6'4", 230, 35 pounds? Graceful, classy, genuine, authentic. I mean, when you looked at Jean Beliveau, you had the consummate respect, for him, and as a result, you had the consummate respect for the team for which he played, the Montreal Canadiens. I don't know of anybody ever, from a Gordie Howe to a Ted Lindsay to any of the little pests in the league, who didn't think that Jean Beliveau represented absolutely everything that was right about the great game of hockey. And
Maurice Richard?
The Rocket. Growing up in Boston, it's funny, Fred Cusick used to do, the Bruins games used to come on at 9:35 on WHTH radio with Fred Cusick, and as a kid I always thought his name was, you know, Maurice Richard. And Cusick would come on and say, "There's Richard!" I had no clue. Then I finally figured out it was the Rocket, Maurice Richard. I mean, how do you describe the Rocket? You know, you'd sneak into the Boston Garden, you'd go up to the heavens and watch the games, and there he would be flying down the ice, and you know, he was unbelievable. And of course, that incident that night that he and Jim Henry, one of the greatest, maybe the greatest picture in the history of hockey, after a very viciously brutal series with all kinds of injuries and everything. It was just classic hockey in the days before helmets. The Warriors, the beaten Warrior, Henry, graciously extending his hand to the triumphant Richard. I mean, there's no greater picture ever in this great game.
And Serge Savard?
Savard, you know, when you consider the fact he was an outstanding defenseman, Serge was a great defenseman for so long, so personable. I mean, there was nothing going on in Montreal that he didn't know about. You know, you'd go into town and he'd say to you, you know, you've got to go to so-and-so tomorrow night and hear so-and-so sing after the game. He was just, you needed a deal, and the players, they needed a deal on cars, on shoes, on suits, whatever it might be. Serge was the operator in Montreal. He'd also give you a tip on the fifth race at Belmont or somewhere like that. To me, he was a tremendous captain and a very, very underrated player. And he also proved to be a very good general manager by winning a Stanley Cup in 1986, when everybody thought the Canadiens would be a long way from returning to their previous glories. It was sort of something that it looked as though it might be a Little League batting helmet that if you threw a ball at it, anything more than about 3 miles an hour, it would shatter. But to his eternal credit, he changed the game of hockey that time for the better by wearing a mask. I mean, even Glenn Hall shortly thereafter started to wear masks. I remember the first night he wore it, playing a game at Madison Square Garden. Jacques actually was thrown out of the game, and Glenn had to go into the net. It was sort of funny when they both played for the Blues back in the early 70s. But Jacques was an iconoclast. He not only was the greatest of all Canadian goaltenders, I think, but he went from there, you know, playing for other teams. He ended up actually playing, I believe his last team was with the Bruins. They needed a goalie late in the early 70s for a season, and there was Jacques at the age of about 48 or something, just in from Switzerland or wherever he was living at the time. He was iconoclastic, he was the right person to do that, and I think hockey is proven to be a much better game with the goalies being shielded with there.
Thank you so much.